On the day the interview featured in this podcast episode was produced, Buckingham Palace announced that Queen Elizabeth II had died. The Heartland Author Podcast offers condolences to the people of Britain and the Commonwealth during this time of mourning. Welcome to another episode of the Heartland Author Podcast. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For today's episode, I had the honor of interviewing J.V. Hilliard. J.V. is the author of the Warminster Series of fantasy books. I'm here with J.V. Hilliard, the author of the Warminster Series of books. J.V., welcome to the Heartland Author Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the time to speak with you and all your listeners today.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure. So my name is J.V. Hilliard. I am an epic and dark fantasy writer. So if you enjoy tales like Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, or have ever played a Dungeons and Dragons game, or even, read books like the Shannara series or some of the stuff that you see today, like Neil Gaiman or Brandon Sanderson, you'll find my stuff along those lines. And my Warminster series is a series of 4 novels, and they focus on a group of adventurers that are trying to stop a big bad evil guy that's making their way through this epic and sweeping adventure, focusing on 2 main characters. There's Damus Alaric, who is a young seer. He's a prophet, and one of the fallen keepers, an enemy of his, a man named Greatoris the Mad, that invades his dreams at night, and it's how the 2 struggle against one another for the fate of the realm.
Without spoiling too much of your books, what are each of your books that have been released so far in the Warminster series about? And if I'm reading Amazon website correctly, your second book in the series was just recently released.
That's right. So, the first book is a book called The Last Keeper, and it's about a young man who's graduating from the Cathedral of the Watchful Eye, which is a place where prophets and seers go to learn how to hone their craft. And it's there that he discovers he has the power to see the future in his dreams. And he starts dreaming about a fallen keeper, someone there that had been one of their ranks in the past, but had done something so evil and so vile, he was excommunicated and blinded by their deity, literally blinded, taken his physical sight away and his medical physical sight away. And it's how he alerts his people, and how this evil keeper is coming back to get him, and specifically him. The books take on sort of a kind of a dark fantasy in the beginning, where he has these evil nightmares, these dreams that come to him that make it difficult for him to interpret what's going on, and it's him growing into his powers throughout the series that allows him to eventually chase down and face the villain one-on-one in the end. Book 2 is a book called Vorden's Lair, again with Damus Alaric as the main character, on the second part of his journey, facing off against Greatoris the Mad, this evil fallen keeper, and it's the idea that he's on his way to a town called Abacus to meet with Voradin the Ageless, which is sort of this old sage of a magic user. It's a wizard of sorts, to gain the knowledge he needs to defeat Greatoris and stop the world from falling into chaos. And so it's the second series of that. It's kind of My Empire Strikes Back, except it's not wedged between the Return of the Jedi and New Hope. It's more it's a 4-book series, so you're about halfway through the 4 by the time you get to the end of book 2. And you're right, it came out on the 6th.
Now, are the books in the Warminster series self-contained, or does the plot continue from one book in the series to the next book?
Yeah, the plot's definitely move from book to book. So there are parts and elements of them that are self-contained in each book, but the characters that you're focusing on grow and fight their way throughout the entire series. Most of them do. Not all of them survive. But you'll have a typical epic fantasy that'll take you through 3, 4, even 10 novels at some times, and you also have some resolution at the end of every novel to some of the plot lines and different story arcs within.
Now, you already answered the next question I was going to have by acknowledging it's a 4-book series, is the planned number of titles. So I'll skip ahead to the next question. Is that, do you plan on writing any books outside of the Warminster series in the future?
I sure do. I have an idea for a standalone vampire novel, which is a bit outside of my genre, but it's something I've been working on for a number of years. I'm also writing something called a serial. And for your listeners that may not know what a serial is a story. It's a monthly release of a short story, typically 2,000 words or less. And so thinking in terms of small chapters that all can be stitched together to become a very long story, but you're only getting them at snackable portions at a time. So once a month, you're getting these things released, and I'm releasing that on Altered Reality Magazine, which is an online magazine that does short stories, novellas, some serials in various genres like fantasy adventure or like sci-fi, or even as they kind of stand up, they're doing more speculative fiction and more speculative poetry, and mine just fits into the serials nature there. So the answer is yes, more is coming, and there may be some additional novels that are written around the Warminster series related to the origin stories of our heroes and in some cases our villains.
Now, the Warminster series is published by a press called Dragon Moon Press. Is Dragon Moon Press a traditional publisher, a vanity press, or a different type of press?
It is a traditional publishing house that focuses on, as I'm guessing you can tell by the name, the fantasy and sci-fi genre. So if you were to go ahead and take a look at their stable of authors, you'd see about 80% of them fall into, fantasy adventure, sword and sorcery, epic fantasy, dark fantasy, those kind of categories, and then 20% fall into the sci-fi or dystopian realm kind of writing. So, Dragon Moon, the reason I chose to go with them is that they focus nearly exclusively on my marketplace and my readership. And so I felt that was important. But also as a debut author, I had to be realistic. None of the big six were going to swing down and pick up an author that didn't have much of a following or readership at this point. So by working with and in conjunction, in many instances in collaboration with my publisher, I'm being exposed to the right kind of reader, and I'm growing my readership base from that, as well as kind of learning the ropes as I go. And if the novels continue to do as well as the debut novel did, then hopefully I can grow into a relationship with one of those big six down the road, and I think that would benefit my publisher and myself as part of that. But for now, I feel like I'm at home. This is a really good place for me to be.
Yeah, and since you referred to Dragon Moon as not part of the big six, I would refer to Dragon Moon as a small traditional publisher.
Exactly. They are a niche publisher that focuses on my genre.
Okay, now what is your typical writing routine if you have one?
Well, I am a traditional planner. I plot out everything, and in part, I think that just goes to my personality. I have a hard time sitting down and writing off the cuff. I know that a lot of people can sit down and fly by the seat of their pants and start writing. I'm the opposite of that. I typically will plot out something on a whiteboard and engineer the plot lines and the character arcs and where they intersect, and then I end up writing the story backwards to forward. So I start at the end, and then as I finish scenes and things I've completed them, they come off my whiteboard. I erase them until there's nothing left on the board. And as stupid as that might sound, it works for me. In part, I think it's the way I think. I'm a little OCD-ish when it comes to making sure that there's no wasted real estate inside my novels. So if you see a detail, it's usually there for a reason. And that way I'm not missing anything, and it helps me really kind of ameliorate any concerns about missing plot points or problems with the story arcs and stuff like that. So it might sound to many as if it's engineering, or in my case reverse engineering, but that's the way I write, and it helps me stay on point when I'm going through the process of putting together a novel.
Now, the fictional realm whose maps are depicted on your website is called the Realm of Warminster. And who created those maps?
So I have a vendor that I use in Florida, and then one that I use that is out of Serbia, and they came together to create the map and also a family tree that I just recently released for my second novel. And the reason I do that is, when you're world building and you're creating the entire realm out of thin air, oftentimes people need some kind of, they're not in your head with you, so they need some kind of guidepost. So, a copy of a downloadable map that they can use to show where the characters are in their head, and they can use it as a reference point or a guidepost, I think is real helpful. And so I use a longtime friend of mine who's a 3D modeler in Florida. His name is Jim Stillwagner. And I use a company out of Serbia called Emily's World of Design. And between Jim putting together the rudimentary aspects of the realm, and then Emily's group really kind of putting the artistic flair onto it, we've created something that I think is not only enjoyable to see and adds character to the novel, but it's utilitarian. A lot of folks need that to kind of follow along as to where the story is and where the characters are.
Now, before I started recording this interview, I do a little bit of research on the guest that I'm interviewing. So, one thing I found rather interesting is that the biography on your author website appears to be of you in character, as opposed to you in real life.
That's right. I did that for a reason. In part, as someone that's creative, I wanted to cast myself as the chronicler of the realm of Warminster, as a character in the novels, right? Someone that was seeing it from the perspective of people that lived in the realm. So I just made sort of this mystical fantasy bio of myself. But if you start to peel back the onion and look at the clues, the things I describe myself as doing, or the people that are around me, really kind of tell people who I am. So, by way of example, I start my bio by saying that I was born of steel, fire, and black wind. Well, I'm from Pittsburgh, and everybody knows that, this, the steel. And I talk about how I'm, in this once great mountain chain, which is the Appalachian Mountains, and the three rivers that forged the wealth and fortune of my realm for many. So for me, it was a way for me to put myself on a map. And then I went through schools. Like, I came from the Highlands. My high school mascot was a Highlander. I went to the University of Pittsburgh, so I studied at the Great Cathedral, where they have the Cathedral of Learning. And so you can find out who I am by just pulling back the little pieces and figuring out the clues. But they all relate to my real life. So my wife, who I describe in my bio as a Ranger of the Diamond, is someone that I met when she was playing softball in college. And so she was a second baseman and a third baseman. So she literally was playing on a diamond, right? Or my dogs are named Thor and McLeod, but I call them horsehounds, not because they're big in real life, which they are, but in my books, there's a group of horses called horsehounds, which are part dog and part horse, which are these huge things that people ride on in the plains where these brigands are. And so it was just a way of making it fun. It's a lot better than just the standard typical bio with me in the smoking jacket sitting there with my college degrees in the background, and my kids and my wife, and it just, I went to school wherever. This way I made it a little bit more fun, and I just cast myself in the role as the chronicler of the realm.
Well, JV, Thank you for appearing on the Heartland Author podcast, and it was wonderful to interview you.
It was my pleasure, sir, and I, really appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you. And thank you very much. And I hope your listeners will enjoy the time that we spent together.
JV was a wonderful guest for this podcast, and I loved his explanation of the biography on his website. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write your imagination. Bye for now. You can learn more about me and my book writing projects at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/authoraac. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook at authoraac and on Instagram at aacscribe. Copyright 2022, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.